You've probably heard of it, right? The 50-30-20 rule. For decades, it's been the go-to advice for anyone trying to get a handle on their budget. It's simple, it's famous, and honestly, it might be setting you up for failure. The world has changed so dramatically since this rule was created, and today we're going to break down exactly why it just doesn't work for millions of people anymore. So the rule's appeal is its beautiful simplicity. It was popularized way back in 2005 by Senator Elizabeth Warren, and it splits your after-tax income into three really clear buckets. You've got half for the stuff you absolutely need, like rent and groceries. Then there's 30% for the fun stuff, the wants that make life worth living. And a solid 20% goes to savings and paying off debt. It's just clean, it's intuitive, and for a really long time, it just worked. But that is the big question, isn't it? The world we live in now, in 2026, is a totally different place than it was in 2005. I mean, with this persistent inflation, housing costs that are just through the roof, and absolutely crushing student debt, a lot of people are finding that it's mathematically impossible to make these percentages fit. So is the rule broken, or are we? To really get why this rule is struggling so much, we have to go back in time. Back to when it was created, because it just wasn't designed for the kind of economic pressures we're all facing today. This timeline really tells the whole story. The rule was born in a period of relative economic calm, and it was followed by a whole decade of low inflation. But then it was like a perfect storm hit. The student debt crisis got way worse, and then inflation and housing costs just went into overdrive. The world this rule was built for, it's gone. And here's where you see the real disconnect. The rule was based on this idea of manageable housing costs, but for us, it's now our single biggest expense. It saw student debt as kind of a minor issue, not the $1.8 trillion crisis it is today. And it was built for stable 9-to-5 paychecks, not the up and down income of the gig economy. The very foundation of the rule has just crumbled. This brings us to the first major problem with the rule. That 50% bucket that's supposed to cover all your needs, well, for millions of people, it's just not big enough anymore, not even close. Let's just look at the hard data. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. For the average American, housing, just housing, eats up over 33% of their spending. Now add in transportation at 17%, and, well, you've already blown past the 50% needs limit. And that's before you've even bought groceries or paid a single utility bill. The rule is basically broken from the very start. And here's exactly why that housing number is so brutal. The cost of a home has completely separated from what people actually earn. What used to cost about 3.5 times the average salary now costs 5 times as much. This isn't a budgeting problem, you guys. It's a full-blown affordability crisis that no simple percentage rule can fix. This quote really just hits home, doesn't it? If you're out there struggling to keep your needs under 50%, or even 60 or 70%, I want you to hear this. You're not failing. You're just experiencing the cold, hard mathematical reality of modern life in so many parts of the country. Okay, the second critical failure of the rule. It's all in that 20% bucket. See, it was designed for a world where savings and debt felt more like choices, not these mandatory burdens that they've become. So here's the other killer flaw. The rule just lumps savings and debt repayment together. But think about it. A student loan payment isn't some flexible savings goal you can adjust month to month. Nope. It's a fixed, mandatory expense. It acts just like another need. And for millions of people, that one bill completely eats up the entire 20% bucket before they can save a single dollar for an emergency or retirement. And just look at this data. This is wild. The group holding the most student debt isn't recent college grads. It's people aged 35 to 49. This thing is a multi-generational financial anchor, and it's weighing down households right in their prime earning years, making it almost impossible for them to build wealth. This whole situation creates what I call the savings deficit. You might feel like you're doing everything right. You're putting that 20% towards your debt like the rule says, but in reality, you're building zero actual savings. And that leaves you with no buffer, no cushion for a job loss or a sudden medical bill. It makes you incredibly financially vulnerable. Okay, so if the old rule is broken, what are we supposed to do? Well, the good news is there are smarter, much more flexible approaches that are actually built for the world we live in right now. The first, and maybe simplest, step is to just adjust the percentages to reflect your reality. Something like a 70-20-10 split, for example, it acknowledges that, yeah, for a lot of us in high-cost areas, our needs are going to eat up the vast majority of our income. It's definitely more restrictive on the wants, but it's also way more realistic, and you're less likely to just get frustrated and give up. Now, for those of you who want a little more precision, there's something called zero-based budgeting. Instead of using these broad, kind of vague categories, this method makes you give every single dollar a specific job. It forces you to be super intentional with your money and to make sure that nothing gets wasted or lost in the shuffle. And here's one I think is really powerful: goal-based budgeting. This one flips the whole script. You don't start with arbitrary percentages. You start with what you actually want to achieve in your life. How much do you need for that down payment? How much do you need to finally kill that high-interest credit card debt? You fund your biggest priorities first, and then you let the rest of your spending fit in around them. It really puts your personal goals in the driver's seat of your finances. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? It's that personal finance needs to be exactly that, personal. Please remember this: a budget is just a tool. It is not a moral test that you pass or fail. If a system isn't working for you, the problem isn't you, it's the system. A budget that actually reflects your real life, your real costs, and your real goals is always going to be better than some perfect one that's impossible to follow. So in an economy this complicated, maybe it's time we all stop trying to squeeze our lives into a 20-year-old formula that doesn't fit anymore. What if the only rule you really need is the one you write yourself? Thanks for watching.